Thank you very much for having me. Thanks to Pete and the team for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many of you. L&D's my bag as well in Ambulance Victoria. I've been a paramedic for 30 years, which doesn't mean much except for my super. It means something. And a bit of the, you're sitting next to your commissioner last night listening to his excellent speech. Listening to his excellent speech about the journey, I'll speak a little bit about the journey as well for us. In terms of ambulance, we're a little bit different in emergency management. I'm Melbourne-centric, of course. It's a much smaller state, much more compact, but the situations will translate across borders. Every response for Rural Fire Service, I imagine, or just about every response, will have an emergency management aspect to it. For ambulance, it's different. Ambulance, the vast majority of the work that we do is responding to 000 calls, heart attacks and short of breath, car accidents, that sort of thing. And only a minimal amount of the times the paramedics will actually see a manager. There's a management built into every response for RFS, I imagine. I've been listening to that this morning. But for the paramedics, we train them all to be independent clinical decision makers because, as I say, the vast majority of the work, they won't see a manager. It'll be just them by themselves making independent clinical decisions. And so the training for the paramedics is all about that, getting to the point where they can make independent clinical decisions about the patient that they're in charge of. So the focus of ambulance paramedic training is about that. But it's not all the work they do. Sometimes they turn up to a major incident, a fire, a hazmat, a car accident with multiple patients. And we've trained them all to be independent clinical decision makers, and they do it very well when they're by themselves. When there's 4 of them or 6 of them or 8 of them at a car accident or a fire, and I turn up as a manager and ask them to do something, the first 2 words out of the AMBO's mouth aren't usually yes, sir. Which is a challenge for me. So they're trained appropriately to do what they're supposed to do, but for an emergency management situation, the challenge for me is to give them, to expose them, to make them aware of different behaviour required and different decisions and different methods to do things. And triage is one of them, and this is about triage. So the structure's probably slightly different, I think, in Victoria. So after 2009, of course, was a sentinel event for us, and around about then we were making slight changes anyway. One of the changes we were making, and I'm not sure of the health structure in New South Wales, but we lobbied long and hard with the health department in producing a state health emergency response plan to make the paramedics, or Ambulance Victoria, the health command agency, so that when there's doctors, nurses, ambulance, first aid on scene, they all report to the AMBO as the health commander. And that's a recognition that these jobs aren't clinical, they're logistical. The single patient with chest pain or short of breath or abdo pain, that's clinical with a logistical subset. Assess the patient, intervene, take them to the hospital. The big job, they're logistical. Get the patients to hospital. That's the main thing. Some of them might get the same interventions that if they were an individual patient, but that's not the main focus. Getting them assessed and into hospital is the main focus. So we've lobbied and were successful in making ambulance the health command agency in Victoria at incidents. So as I say, all the health agencies report to the AMBO, which we think probably works better for us and certainly has been working well. As a support agency, we do what ambulance does. So we provide transport, intervention and triage. Triage, treatment and transport, and triage is the focus of this presentation and the product that we've developed. The mass, as I've said before, the mass casualty incidents, the multiple patient incidents, are low in frequency, but of course they're high in consequence, unfortunately, and that's the nature of it. One of my substantial responsibilities is to debrief all the escalations of our emergency response plan. of which there's about 3 a day in Victoria, and that's different levels of escalation, but about 3 a day. And one of the issues is the role of the first crew, or the lack of role of the first crew. We certainly have designated roles for them. They don't often apply it appropriately, and that's not necessarily their fault. They'll be focused on other things. Certainly the injuries to the patients. But one of my roles, as I said, is to provide the awareness that there's a need to behave differently and what that behaviour is. The culture is different, as I've already explained. The vast majority of their work they do is a single patient by themselves or backed up by another car. Sometimes it's multiple patients in a mass casualty incident, and so we need to change the culture, and we're slowly changing the culture. But it's been difficult for us because there's not many tools for us to do that. You guys in rural fire and the Metropolitan Fire Brigade in Melbourne, and the CFA and the police agencies around the country exercise all the time, and it's terrific. Deployment exercises, they're fantastic, and people get a lot out of them, except for ambulance. Because if you think about it, if you set up a deployment exercise tomorrow, and you'll have fire agencies going there drilling and police drilling and setting up perimeters and that sort of stuff, but the ambos turn up and they load patients in the back of the truck. There's not that much in it for us. We do that all day, every day in an exercise. So we were looking for something that was different. We were looking for something that provided a better bang for the buck in the pre-hospital setting, in the mass casualty. Some of you may have seen before a Mergo-Train. A Mergo-Train is a Swedish tool using whiteboards and magnets to represent resources, and done in real time, utilising identifiable resources, and it puts a focus on clinical decision making versus resource management. If I put a line in this guy, or if I stick a tube down his throat, and it takes me 15 minutes to prepare and do, that's good for that patient. What does it do to the rest of the patients in the mass casualty setting? Clinical decision making versus resource management. And this is the best tool that we found. It's a face-to-face tool, a Mergo-Train, whiteboards, magnets. The ambos love it, which is good for me because it's hard to get them to drill because they're busy, and I've got to pay them overtime to do it anyway. Hard for me to get them to do it, but they love doing this. They're totally engaged. In about 30 seconds, they figure there's a giggle factor for about 30 seconds, and then they're totally engaged by this tool. It's fantastic. Some of you may have seen it. However, because it's whiteboards and magnets, you can only have so many paramedics around a whiteboard before it gets too cluttered. And this is a whole of health exercises, so we use pre-hospital and hospital to represent resources. So I can only use about 15 paramedics maximum in the Mergo-Train tool, face-to-face. The experience is fantastic, and the results are terrific, and the debriefs that we have they're invaluable. But about 15 paramedics at a time, and I only do about one a month. Otherwise I go nuts. And I've got about 3,000 paramedics, so you can see how long it's going to take me to influence the paramedic population. So, and we were audited on this tool, and the external audit, and the results were terrific. They were very encouraging. However, they said you need to hit more paramedics with it, and it's difficult. Emergency Management Unit in Ambulance Victoria, we've got about 4 operational staff, about half a dozen admin staff, and 3,000 paramedics. You do the math. It's a little bit difficult for me to get around there. So we were looking to put it online, such as Peter was saying with you guys and the training for you guys. And it provides the best, because as I said before, what I'm trying to do is provide awareness to the paramedics that there's different behaviour required in the mass casualty incident and what those different behaviours are. And the key roles are the first crew and the managers. Because as I said, they don't do it very often. They do 8 to 10, they do 150 jobs a month or however many they're doing. Not many of them are mass casualty because of the spread of the mass casualty incidents. And so the first crew on scene is exposed highly in their Mergo-trained tool, and so is the manager. But that's only, or managers, and that's probably only 4 or 5 paramedics I can put through in every exercise. So we wanted to highlight those roles and hit more people in their own time, such as Peter was saying before, when they want to do it in their own time, and do it more efficiently for ambulance, to penetrate the workforce, as it says. So computer simulation. So add the element of realism, low resource cost once it's established. Once we started to do it, we realised the value of it quickly. Same as Peter and you guys. The value of it is immense, and the efficiency of it. Able to hit the paramedics in the regional areas, able to hit the volunteers. So once again, so New South Wales is a much bigger area. Victoria is much more compact, less volunteers. However, we rely on them heavily, even in the ambulance service, more so in the country fire authorities, as I'm sure you're aware. Removes the requirement for an instructor. And we provide that tool online. I'll show you about that in a minute. But removes the reliance on face-to-face. It was costing us a lot of money to have the face-to-face, and I think that at the moment, the face-to-face training with a Mergo train probably provides more value, because I can have a one-on-one and look at what the paramedics are doing and talk to the manager and see that they're getting it or they're not getting it. I don't get to see that with the online version yet. But we're going to, I think, we're certainly going to do that, and I'm sure Peter will agree. Available concurrently to the whole workforce, plus after hours, and a positive cost benefit, and that's the big bang for the buck for executives and managers and governments, of course. So the paths. We partnered with, we partnered with a software development company, CAE, and sought funding. And we had to go through probity and make sure that, because we're a government agency like you guys, and so all of that sort of stuff, but we sought government funding. We achieved it through what was then the Office of the Emergency Services Commissioner in Victoria. It's now Emergency Management Victoria, and the Australian Government, the Attorney General's Department. We achieved some funding for it, which was fantastic. Because once again, in Emergency Management Victoria, and it'll sound like I'm bleating a little bit, I'm not, in Emergency Management Victoria, because most of the work is the OOO response, that's what we're funded for. We're not funded for emergency management. So we've got to find funding we've got to find our own streams of funding and generate our own streams of funding, so it's difficult. So we received the grant, we sold it to management, develop some learning objectives, design a scenario, and feedback design. The objectives were all about, as I said, about the role of the first crew and the triage officer, because triage is the key. Same as you guys, we all learn from major incidents within Australia and from overseas, and certainly from overseas from a pre-hospital perspective. London 7-7 was a terrific learning for us, and triage was the critical element there. The recommendations were about triage and more effective triage and early triage. So we're learning from that. Personal safety, providing, so all the stuff that you do, provide timely reports, talk and task your partner, triage, apply life-saving treatments, because we want them to think, as I said before, clinical decision-making versus resource management. We don't want them to be doctors in the field in the mass casualty setting, because that's valuable to one patient. It's do the most for the most. That's what we're trying to achieve. Patient treatment, not necessarily establish the priority and establish a casualty clearing point. So get the patients away from the bomb, from whatever the hazard is, the bombs, the bullets, the flames, the fluid, the gas, whatever it is, and put them in a place where they're a little bit more pristine, so that we can apply more interventions, more appropriate interventions. But in the field, at the incident, it's very much do the most for the most, get them away from here. So the scenario design, surface transport incidents are the most common event, escalation of our emergency response plan, as you guys can probably imagine, about 40%. We wanted to hit them between the eyes, so they're immediately confronted with a large number of patients, which is the challenge for paramedics. They are extremely good at walking in and taking control of a single patient situation, because that's what they do all the time. When they're confronted with more people with similar priorities in terms of their illness or injuries, that's when they're confronted. Where do I start? I can make a difference with this patient, and that's what they tend to do. They default clinically. They go and sit with one patient and play with them, because that's what they're good at. We want them to assess the whole scene, not just a single patient. And in fact challenge their thinking to the point where they're doing reverse triage. If somebody had chest pain in here, somebody was unfortunate to have chest pain in here right now, paramedics would come in and they'd treat them and intervene and take them to hospital, and all the focus would be on that patient and the clinical outcome for that patient. If I took that patient with chest pain and put them on top of Kinglake in Victoria on February 7th, 2009, they would just be another injury or illness amongst a hell of a lot of others. And they might not get the same treatment. In fact, they probably wouldn't, because I'd never have enough resources to do that. So we want them to use make the best use of their resources. So in fact, the walking patients are assessed first and treated first. Find the walking patients and get them out of there. The ones that can't walk, we'll get to them a bit later. So it's reverse triage, which is extremely challenging to the paramedic. I don't want him to use his skills. I want him to walk in there, him or her. I want them to walk in there, and they're not a clinical resource at all. They're a management tool. You're not a clinician, you're a management tool. Hold on to the radio, hold on to a folder. Don't even put your blue gloves on. You're a management tool, and that challenges the paramedics, but that's what's required. So multiple patients hits them between the eyes. A situation suitable for urban and rural applications, similar to yours. Limited resources to force decision making, and a patient bank inspired by real world cases for credibility. So we took patients from actual transport accidents and applied them and their clinical injuries to the patient bank for this tool. So the feedback design, the objective versus the feedback points. So they are scored. So they're playing the game, such as Peter was talking to you about before. They're playing the game. They get extra points for doing the right thing, and they lose points for doing the wrong thing, or if they take too long, or they don't give a sit rep, or they give incorrect information, or they make the wrong decisions. And so the benefit for the PlayStation player is that they can challenge themselves or challenge other people. So at the moment it's only one-on-one, so it's them playing by themselves, but in future versions they'll be able to play against other people. But at the moment they can compare high scores and that sort of thing. They get bonus scores, they get time penalties, treatment priority, accuracy, and as I said before, at that casualty clearing point for efficiently applying medical interventions. Technology defeats me, and it's not my go. I'm the practitioner and the trainer, but some of you will understand this. So but clearly, obviously, we needed to be. We didn't have the funding. We had the funding to develop the game, not to produce extra technology. So we had to adapt what we had, such as you guys. So we upgraded the video cards in the computers. The paramedics are very busy, as I'm sure you'll be aware. So they start playing at work. They're going to stop in 5 minutes, and they'll come back. And as Peter said, we couldn't have them at the moment. They can't save it in the only version that we released. Clearly, we need to fix that, and in future versions they'll be able to save it so they can enter where they left the game. Limited budget, so we've got year funding at the moment, and that's a challenge for us. So the technology is used, and you know some of this already. So XVR, same as yours. The Victim Base from MDM Academy, so the patient data bank that I was talking about before. So that intellectual property is ours. So the game playing is XVR and CAE. The intellectual property about the patients is ours. Intelligent agent design and Moodle learning management system. and houses results and scores. And soon we're going to place this on our learning management system, but they can also download it at home at the moment and in the future as well. As I said before about the patients, this was an extremely important part for us, that they were credible, that they weren't going to they weren't going to be able to challenge us and say that's ridiculous, because these are real patients. And we had our expert clinicians go through it and pose, if we did this, what would happen after 20 minutes? If we don't do this, what would happen if we leave the optimal treatment or less optimal treatment or no treatment? So this is the scenario, and in fact, Kath, as I said, technology defeats me, and I wasn't as good as Peter. I couldn't embed it in the video, so I'm going to go to a separate one.
Welcome to a demonstration of the Ambulance Victoria triage simulation. When we start the simulation, we first see a dispatch screen which displays all the information provided to the first responding crew. As we can see, we're responding to a traffic accident involving a bus. When we're ready to start, we click on the Acknowledge button at the bottom of the screen to take us to the 3D virtual world. I can use the arrows on my keyboard so that I can move left and right and forwards and backwards in the scenario. On the top left are the talking heads. These represent all those people around me that I can talk to. My partner is flashing orange, suggesting he wants to talk to me. But for the moment, I want to talk to the dispatcher and tell them that we've arrived. I also want to give them a quick situation report, which I can type in, estimate the number of patients, and also ask for some backup. Now that we've done that, I can turn to my partner and see what he wants. He's asking what personal protective equipment I should wear. I want all of the safety equipment for this job. Now he's asking what equipment to take with us. I want my triage cards and the trauma kit so I can give life-saving care. Finally, he's asking what I'd like him to do. In Ambulance Victoria, I'd normally ask him to be the transport officer, but I could ask him to triage patients, treat patients, or do a number of other things. For the moment, I want him to be the transport officer. Okay, now I can go ahead, enter the scene and start triaging patients. This girl looks like she can walk. Let's quickly confirm by asking her. Yes, she can walk. Now I should triage her. I can triage her as green for walking wounded. Why don't I ask her to go to the casualty collecting point? She doesn't know where it is because I haven't set it up yet. So now if I look around the scene for a good space, I can click on a site for the casualty clearing point and she'll walk towards it. Let's move on and triage another patient. Here's a woman lying on the ground. She's asking for help. Let's see if she can walk. No, she can't walk, so let's now triage her. By clicking over her chest, I can record her respiratory rate. By clicking on her wrist, I can record her pulse rate. Right, she's a priority too, so let's tag her. Now she's not out of the woods, so maybe we should find a bystander to stay with her. There's a lady standing over in the corner. Let's get her attention. We might need to move closer. By clicking on her, she'll now ask me what I'd like. Let's ask her to stay with the patient. She's asking who. All I need to do is click on the patient and she'll move over and stay with them. Let's move on and triage another patient. Here's a man lying on the ground. He's not talking. We'll do the shake and shout. He's still not talking. Time to triage. We'll check his respiratory rate, and from a quick look we can see he's got some chest and neck injuries. He's not breathing, so we need to clear his airway. So we'll move to treatment, we'll select airway, clear airway and treat. So now we're performing the clear airway treatment. Whilst we're doing that, I can look to see if anybody else is trying to get my attention. I could cancel this treatment if there was something else going on I needed to attend to. but for the moment I'll continue clearing his airway based on the time taken in the real world. I've done that treatment, now I can go back and check to see if he's breathing. So I go to triage and click on his chest again. He's still not breathing, I'll tag him as dead and I need to move on to the next patient. In this way, I can triage all the patients in the scenario. I can even go onto the bus and triage the patients in there. Now when paramedics arrive, I can task them to do things to support me. So let's do that with my partner. I'll just click on him and I can ask him to do a number of roles. Let's get him to triage the other patients for me. We can also task bystanders to help us. I'll click on this fellow and ask him to follow me. There's two gentlemen over here we need to triage. This gentleman looks as though he can walk. Let's ask him. Yes, he can. So let's triage him as a priority 3.
Okay, you get the gist of it. So that version we've rolled out to the branch computers, all the branch computers in the state, and the paramedics can download it from home. Kat, just bring up the PowerPoint again, please. Yes, it was amusing. The poor bloke only had 2 chances to breathe, and that was it. But that's the reality for us in mass casualty triage. In fact, I'd probably, if I was the manager, I wouldn't expect, if the patients aren't breathing and you open their airway and they don't breathe, that's it for me. Move on, because we just don't have the time. Because we could spend, as you can imagine, we could spend the next hour and a half with that patient trying to resuscitate them, which would be fantastic, or not for that patient, but everyone else. Because don't forget, this could be, in your situations in rural fire, the next ambulance resource might be how long? 20, 30 more minutes away. So they don't have the time to do what they normally do, which is what I was saying before. This challenges them because they want to. They know they can make a difference with those sick people. I don't want them to think like a clinician, I want to think like a manager. How many have I got and what type are they, and report that. This is what I've got, this is what I need. Which is not what they normally do. They normally intervene and make a difference. So we've seen all this. So as you can see, so it's asked. So they need to ask for what they want, and they do it normally. They just need to replicate that here, and sometimes they forget to do it, and in their enthusiasm to clear this scene and do all the things that they want to do, they forget things, which is why it's a good idea for them, and it's a good tool to go back and do it again and again and again, and improve your score and improve your triage efficiency. We give them access to a triage algorithm tool, so that they can follow the triage to work out the different values, to whether they're yellow, red, green, black's reasonably obvious to you all now. If they want to, and if it suits them, they can apply, and we give them access to any interventions that they would normally have access to in their ambulance, and the level of training that they've got. They can do whatever they like. It might affect their score, however. Long interventions, long complicated interventions probably will in fact affect their score. As I said, so all the treatments, and also if they didn't choose to bring the appropriate equipment with them, that would affect they wouldn't be able to apply the treatments. If they haven't got a blood pressure cuff because they didn't select it, then they can't take a blood pressure. If they haven't got their PPE on, that will affect their score. And situation reports as well. In fact, they won't be able to complete the scene until they've given at least one situation report. And if I'm aware of the incident, I'm screaming at them via the dispatcher or via the manager on scene to give a situation report. And that's another thing where we, as an organisation, perform poorly in sit reps. You guys, every job you do, word back and sit rep, certainly in CFA and MFB in Victoria, word back and sit rep every job. Us, we don't, because they don't need to. Majority of the cases, as I've been saying, are normal medical surgical cases. They don't need to give a sit rep. And when they do need to give it, they do it poorly. So this is another tool to remind them about the need for a sit rep and an effective sit rep. So this is the feedback and the session. So they get scores, as you said, and it tells them what they chose or what they didn't choose, and how that affects their scores. It gives them feedback on the triage decisions and the treatment decisions that they made as well. So they know after doing this where they went well or where they could improve next time. The rollout for us, so we launched it with the Minister mid to late last year and rolled it out to the branches, as I said. Just need to look at the numbers here. So to March 20,400. So as I said before, for a Mergo train, about 15 paramedics per session per exercise, and about one exercise every month. In up to March 2014, 292 users accessed the system, 77 users downloaded for home use, 1,690 separate launches of the simulation. So in a very short period of time, we've exposed this tool and this learning to a hell of a lot more paramedics than I ever could do with a Mergo train. As I said, a Mergo train is probably more effective, but I'm not going to get that. I don't have the luxury of hitting everybody with a Mergo train. This is better in terms of accessing them. 249 sessions longer than 5 minutes, and that goes also to what Peter said before about that 7 minutes to whatever. We know that these guys are busy, so some of them were interrupted in their game, and some of them got sick of it, bored with it, sort of thing. 20 have fully completed the scenario. To fully complete the scenario, and we don't tell them how to do that, but to fully complete this scenario, they must have triaged every single person and reported that. That's the task. Triage every single person and report what you've got. And there's different rates of success, of course. Can be utilised as a modelling tool. So we know just from us in developing it, we know there's different ways to do it now. So the average person probably, if somebody arrived at that scene, a paramedic crew arrived at that scene today, a bus versus a bus, it would probably take them effectively between 30 and 40 minutes to assess the whole situation effectively and report on it. We know just by using this and tasking different people, and whilst we didn't see it here, fire crews arrived and they can task the firefighters as well to do things. We know that by using different strategies and tactics, you can do it in about 10 minutes. I haven't told the paramedics that, don't tell them. Anybody that knows any Ambulance Victoria paramedics, but they can, and so a study showed a 67 efficiency improvement in it. I don't know how you guys would go if I tasked you, if you're the first firefighting crew to start triaging those patients, but we'll see how we go. Sorry? Right, you know what to do with the dead ones, that's right. Hosing them, not the answer either. Version 2. So we have, as I said before, we've rolled out version 1. We're about to, hopefully, once again, next month, roll out version 2, which, as you can see, is a fire scenario, and it looks familiar because it is familiar. It's made by the same people, and in this version we've added enhancements, and we can task them with more. We can ask them to be a bit more complex with what they do. Single click buttons, triage and treatment tab interface, ability to get incremental reports from the paramedics. It's just a more sophisticated version than version 1. They have a health meter this time, which means if they walk into that warehouse that was on that structure fire that was burning, without protection, without an escort, they'll get sick and eventually die. So we've got a health meter for them. Health monitoring for firefighters. I don't know in New South Wales, but in Victoria, every time every incident that we're co-responded with MFB or CFA, we will offer to the incident controller health monitoring for the firefighters. So where the Ambulance Victoria is the tool for the fire agencies for health monitoring in the field. And it's taken up or it's denied, that's fine, not a problem, but we're happy to offer it. Treatment visualisation, but we can now load the patients into ambulances and take them. Basic coordination with the incident controller, and that's the next level for certainly from my perspective. This is what I want to get into. So the first one was about the initial paramedic. Now we're starting to get into the manager at the scene, and this is where I think we can get some tremendous efficiencies. Where the health commander, who's an AMBO, is talking to the incident controller, whatever agency he or she is from. And pathing of virtual characters, that's some gameplay improvements. So in the first one, people walk through the bus, which is pretty good. We're hoping that people don't walk through the fire unimpeded here. AV2, so due soon, so hopefully, as I say, next month, there's the health meter in the bottom left corner. And there's wind direction on the right. Project 3, so we've sought funding. I think we've just been granted funding for Year 3. Enhanced roles, virtualise the triage officer and develop the role of their partner, who's the transport officer, and develop the role of other paramedics and apply to others, and enhance functionality, load and transport patients from the scene, and the impact of that. So the impact of in a remote or rural area of loading patients, because the paramedics, certainly in Melbourne, they'll want to get there, load a patient and go. And that might be okay in Melbourne, where we're relatively resource rich, but it wouldn't be okay here for a 40 or 50 patient incident to load the first patient that you come across. You want to pick and choose who's going where, or if at all. Continuing rollout to enhancements to attract other users, develop multiplayer capability, and that's where we think there'll be a tremendous take-up from the paramedic when they can play against each other and get the competitive juices flowing there. Choose a vacant role, communicate with those in other roles, develop levels of complexity and the command layer. And as I say, that's where I'm looking for. I want to see the critical, I want to see what the managers are thinking and what they're reacting to and how they manage the other resources that they've got. We're seeking national emergency management funding for the CAA rollout. CAA is our peak industry body, so AFAC's yours. CAA, Council of Ambulance Authorities, is our peak industry body. So we're seeking funding there, so any of you that influence things at a national level, remember us. The CAA have adopted this tool so once it's rolled out, so every jurisdiction in Australia and New Zealand will be using virtual. And also via the CAA, we've all got the same triage algorithms now. So smart triage, triage civ, and triage sort in every jurisdiction. So we're getting there in terms of national strategies as well. They're just the people who developed the tool. So my boss holding the prize there. That's Justin, whose voiceover it was on the video. As you've seen. And as you're doing, so the virtual paramedic simulation is a health tool specially designed for paramedics. But and I was going to say there's no reason why it couldn't be adapted to a fire scenario. You're already doing it clearly, and I can only assume that you'll get as much benefit out of it as we are getting out of virtual paramedic. That's it for me. I'm more than happy to take some questions, but I just want to say once again thanks for having me. Today. It's very generous of Peter and his team and Kath for organising it, and I hope you have a great forum and you get lots out of it.